Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for our first ever webinar on Business Innovation Brief, Assessing and Fostering a Culture of Innovation, sponsored by Innovation 360 Group. I'm Naba, the Site Manager of Business Innovation Brief, and I'm excited to be bringing you this session with hard-earned insight on innovation management. Before we go any further, I want to thank Innovation 360 Group for sponsoring this webinar and helping us to make it happen. If you don't know about them, they support organizations in establishing an adaptable innovation process and helping to foster a culture of innovation. Thanks again, Innovation 360. On that note, please feel free to ask questions during today's session. You can do so by submitting them into the questions panel on the right side of your screen. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can throughout the presentation and at the end. My lovely colleague Erin here will be fielding all your questions today. She'll be happy to answer any that you might have. So pull up the questions panel, say hello, and let her know you're listening. Also, if you have any audio issues during today's presentation, you may choose to dial in by phone. You can do so by selecting the More button in the upper right portion of your screen, and then select the Switch to Phone option. And today, we have the pleasure of being joined by internationally renowned thought leader on innovation, AI, and business transformation, Magnus Pinker. In addition to being the CEO and founder of Innovation 360, he's also the author of 7 books, and he's currently the contributing editor of the International Journal of Innovation Science. He's also working on a book titled The Complete Guide to Business Innovation. And for the past 8 years, he's been using his practical and theoretical insights to develop a customized assessment, InnoSurvey, which is the leading methodology and global innovation database used to analyze and provide advice to companies, business leaders, and scientists around the world, which is exactly what he's going to discuss with us today. Take it away, Magnus.
Oh, thank you, Naba. Great to meet you all. Magnus Pinker here. So I have, of various reasons, met up with a good number of innovation parks in North America, both in the US and in Canada. It's interesting when you meet all these innovation parks where they pump in a lot of money. And I would say half of them is asking the same question when you meet them the first time. That is like, okay, could you bring our companies like 30 IDs? And yeah, but you know what? Then I would start a company instead. So that's quite interesting how innovation are perceived. So the obvious counter question, and I posted one actually this morning, is that okay, do you think that you need to train to win OS Olympic in, let's say, tennis? Yeah, of course. So you do need a trainer. Yeah. You need a training program. Yeah. You can't compete every day, right? So how come that you think that you can compete in business every day? Because you can't. So that is like why it's important with fostering culture. You need to understand that if you want to win, to be the best and constantly stay on top, you also need to train your organization, not wasting a lot of energy and a lot of human potential, instead using it in the absolutely most efficient way. And that's actually what we will be focusing on during today's call. So you had the possibility to test drive the InnoSurvey, and if you did, you also have a report, 40-page, with an analysis and recommendation how you can take off your organization. And I will use the data from the one answering the survey during today's call and make it a little bit more interactive, actually. Before that, I would like to start with a few with like the problem statement. We are, as I guess most are aware of, having issues with the climate. It's everything from warming to mass pollution. And we also have population explosion. We have macro conflicts. We have hyper competition. And the thing is that exponential technology can actually solve quite many of these issues. The question is how we do it. If we knew the answer, we would most likely already done it. So we need to explore. And that's like the problem statement, why it's important with innovation. It's important because we live in very turbulent times. And to be able to cope with that, you need to use technology internally and externally, new way of working, a new way of processing, creating values internally, externally, everything from product, services to business models or processes. So everybody talks about innovation, and as a matter of fact, 84% want to innovate, but only 10% have what it takes to do that in terms of tools, guidance. And the question is, of course, why? How is that possible? So except from that, we also have a situation. We have very courageous individuals that actually call for change. People like Greta Thunberg, to mention one of many. We have new exponential technology like photonic CPUs, AI, 3D printing. We have global initiatives, and that's on the plus side. On the minus side, we have organizations that have lack of understanding how to structure themselves to organize for actually taking these opportunities. Every threat has a flip side, and that is an opportunity to actually maximize the possibilities. And let me put it this way. I like to grow the cake and then take the cake. I think it's pretty stupid idea to shrink the cake first and then take the cake. It's much better to create a big, healthy, sustainable market that survive. Killing my customer is not my favorite thing. I think that's stupid. I think we should grow the pie and then we take the pie. And I will link back to that during this call as well. So the problem is not lack of ideas. Actually, we have a lot of ideas. The problem is getting where, why, what, how, and who. That's the tricky part. I guess you might recall the situation where you have, a super excited organization, and everybody say, let's innovate, let's do this. And suddenly you start to feel that you don't really know what to do. And then you pump in money and it's getting very expensive. And at the end of the day, it's too big to fail. So you have to continue. And that is exactly not how to do it, because you can't know in advance what really will take off. You have to experiment and learn and actually fostering culture for that. So at Innovation 360, what we have done is that we collected data from more than 5,000 companies in 105 countries and used that together with the current thinking from the last 100 years and codify that and use the insights for actually understanding how to carve and create, adjust and align a culture with your strategy. There is also an upcoming standard for that. I guess many of you know about it, ISO 56000. And we are on the committee for that one. So what I will present here today are quite much aligned with the upcoming standard. So why is it important? Why does it matter? First of all, GDP is driven by innovation. Secondly, customers want to buy from innovative companies and employees want to work for innovative companies. And I think that's a very good reason. So what is innovation? Well, there's many definitions. My favorite definition is actually a quote from Joseph Schumpeter. He lived during the end of 1800th century to the middle of the 1900th century. And he said that innovation is the creative destruction where entrepreneurs combine existing elements in new ways. That implies that everything already exists, and that is a pretty cool thought. The silicon been in the ground for millions of years until some entrepreneur, brought it up. They did it up and did some transistor with it, and then IC, and then after that we'll go into the new generation with microchips, and who knows, maybe we have photonic CPUs very soon on the market, and if that happens, we have infinite computer power. But light has been around for ages, since the beginning. So everything exists. It's a matter of what to do with it, and that leads to two things that is very important. You have to deal with uncertainty and you have to deal with infinity. These two units cannot be divided. That means philosophically and mathematically and logically, you can't use Scrum or Agile method or any kind of performance management methods to deal with that. You have to deal with them as unities. And that means that you have to use other kind of methods to deal with total radical innovation or disruption if you want to. So we will walk you through today radical innovation versus incremental innovation, and how you actually fostering culture for doing one of them or both simultaneously, as well as how you work with business model innovation, management system innovation, organization structure innovation, process, production and services innovation. First, I would like to mention a pretty large study done by PwC and Booz Allen that shows clearly that if you spend money on innovation compared with actually creating a culture of innovation, you will actually grow slower. You will earn less and your market cap will be less. And if you align your capabilities with your strategy, which is called highly coherent, you will actually earn even more and grow even more. So normalized coherent companies were founded to enjoy 22% higher result than less coherent industry peers. And they outperform also spenders that do not organize themselves for innovation. So what we have found among the 5,000 organizations that have demonstrated double-digit growth over many years is that they are focusing on their DNA. We found that they are focusing on the real need, and they're reinforcing the value proposition constantly, and they use a technology-driven strategy. And I will come back to that. That's like a few key findings. Okay, why do not everybody succeed with innovation? What is the problem actually? What is the trick? Well, you need to work with today's business in the first S-curve, in Horizon 1, that's explorative, incremental work. And you need to do that because that's your blood circular. That's how you make money. And you need to constantly find new way of extending the existing S-curve. But an S-curve will end. All S-curve ends. It doesn't matter if you are a country, civilization, organization, animal, human, everybody has an end. It's just to accept it. So, of course, you would like to extend the lifespan, sure. And you should do that. That's incremental innovation, constant improvements. But you also need to find the upcoming S-curve to be able to make the jump. That's the exploratory work, or as we call it, radical innovation. That is much harder because you deal with uncertainty and you deal with infinity. You need to work in another kind of, you need to use another kind of approach. We actually do a lot of experimentation, a lot of prototyping, having hypotheses, and learn. And the learning can be brought down to generating data and real insights, and that could in turn be used actually to create full-blown ROI that could be used in the first horizon. So we use, when we work a model, I guess a few of you have seen this model, it's actually from the 1999. So it's slicing up it even more. So the first horizon is today's business, the return is cash. The third horizon is the radical, the explorative work, the return is insights. And the second horizon, you return data from experiments. And thinking of innovation this way will help you to actually fostering a culture. I will come back to that very soon. Before I do that, in December in Bangkok, we presented a scientific study for IEEE, where we prove with data from 2,900 companies that radical innovators are actually statistically seen more structured than incremental innovators when it comes to decision making. Actually, each step of the innovation process, but especially in decision making. And I guess there is a quite natural explanation to that. They wouldn't survive otherwise. So I guess that's why. Nevertheless, it's very important and very encouraging to study them and see how well structured they are. So what's also interesting is that radical innovators seems to be incremental, but incremental innovators is normally not radical, which leads us to the conclusion that the one that has best capability and grow most over time and make less mistakes are the ones that are able to handling both radical and incremental innovation at the same time. I would like you all to take a piece of paper, and I give you a few seconds to write down on this piece of paper an I if you think that your organization is incremental, an R if you think that your organization is radical, and you can have both apparently. Please write down on a piece of paper, or you can do it on your computer, a T for technology driven, M for market driven, N for need seeking. And then you think about the innovation process. If you have a weak innovation process, please write P1. And if it's super strong, write P5 or something in between P2, P3, P4. And then at the end, I would like you to write down C1 to C5 for do you have the capability in place for innovation? If you don't, C1. If you have everything in place, C5. So I give you a few seconds to do that, and then we will go ahead and I will look back to this. So save the piece of paper in front of you, or if you have an iPad or whatever you do notes in, and we will actually look back to this one.
And
all right.
Magnus, while we're letting everyone write down their answers, I had a quick question come in. So you talked about, how the study where a lot of companies were spending money on innovation, but in reality, it's better to be aligning your culture with innovation. Can you provide some examples of what these companies may have been using their resources on when trying to achieve innovation without making that culture shift?
Yeah, there are very many examples where you pump in enormous amount of money to solve a problem that you haven't really understood fully yet. I would guess that one maybe of the most common things over the last 5, 6, 7 years is how big brick and mortar try to enter the space of e-commerce, and they are not especially successful. So instead, they should learn and experiment with omnichannel, but instead they have just, in panic reacted and invested an enormous amount of money in logistics, logistic centers, supply, expensive systems. So that I think is a very general example without pointing at a specific company. A very, very good example that I can point finger to because it's public and I think it's not controversial, at least not in the US. It's Volkswagen and Dr. Winterkorn. He was under some pressure because he had to reduce the carbon dioxide from the cars. And they couldn't really fix it, so they cheated. And I guess everybody know what's happened. I call that the Dr. Winterkorn paradox, actually, because they are the one having the resources to really find a solution, but they're also the one not doing it because they are too big to fail, and instead they actually encourage people to cheat. That's a very good example where you actually not even do it. You just take a chance and figure out like a way of cheating the system. Other examples, I guess, is what's happening with Boeing. We don't have enough research about what's really happened, but I think it's not a brave guess to say that, well, they were a little bit too anxious about the competition, and they might not have done the homework in the past with the competition with Airbus. So the history is full of examples, and I will not point finger at Boeing because we don't know enough yet, but I can point finger to Volkswagen because that is actually a lot of studies. And I have another example here also, which I will come to right now actually, which is, there are two pictures on the slide here, and if anyone can guess what we have on the left-hand side, so it is actually the first digital camera from Kodak, and they went under Chapter 11, which is very, very strange because they had 1975, the first working digital camera. It's amazing. That's more than 30 years ago. It's astonishing. It's how much? 43 years, 44 years ago. So why didn't they survive? Because they were focused on selling chemicals for developing. And actually, they had the best year ever before they went bankrupt. The most profitable year ever. And they didn't invest. They only spent money on trying to actually continue on the path they had and spend very little resources on new technology. Still, they had it. And that's quite typical. But the management team were aligned with their incentive systems, which was basically bonus on the gross profit. So the reasons to change anything was quite less. So it's everything about spending things on the right things, but it's also about incentive systems. So while on the right hand side, you have the patent from Gillette, which is quite interesting. That's a very rudimentary technology, but it was sold 2011 to Procter & Gamble for $57 billion. That was higher than the whole Ericsson was valued to at the time. And how is that possible? Well, if you think about it, they have spent an enormous amount of resources and money, and they study human behavior, and they really use that to refine their models. A good way of explaining that is if I ask you guys, how many strokes, is there anyone using a shaver as a man? And I ask you, how many strokes do you take every morning? It's a little bit hard to do it on a web call, but normally people say between 35 and 45. However, in reality, it's 145. The conclusion is that men doesn't know what they do in the morning, and neither do customers. So we have to actually have anthropology way of working. We have to act as an anthropologist to understand behavior. And that is one of the key findings, that you have to interest yourself to learn more. That's how you can explore the unknown instead of making a super big bet on something or stick to what you have. So both ways are not especially fruitful. Big bets on something you don't know, or stay to what you have. Both will lead most likely to a declining S-curve. Instead, you need to figure out based on behavior, insights, experiments, and refine. And over time, you will be able to leap to the next S-curve. And I kind of like to see this as a fish bowl where you fight with other fishes in one bowl. And then you need to find a new bowl because people start to eat up each other. It's also called M&A. So they swallow each other because they starve. So an alternative to that is to jump to a new fishbowl. The problem, however, is that you need to have a direction, a strategy, and you need to have the capability, which is how you make the jump. So fostering a culture will help you to actually find the direction and the capability of making these jumps. And there is a good number of companies that haven't been able to do that. Toys R Us is one. And we don't have enough research about that, but I will make a qualified guess and say, I think that they pumped in quite much money in figuring out how to do like e-tailing instead of maybe rethinking the whole business model and start to do small experiments and maybe find out how people play today, how do kids play today, instead of just pumping out what they have and invest super much money in finding omni-channel strategies. So I think basically we will see in the future that Toys R Us biggest problem was not distribution channels or brick and mortar becoming e-tailing or Amazon killing them. I think they were irrelevant actually. I don't know, but let's see, the future will tell us. That's an hypothesis. And same goes for many others. And the reason is that most of the large corporations, they tend to prioritize large market instead of actually thinking the other way around. Maybe we can use small markets to do tests instead and learn. Also, competence become incompetence. You have internal conflicts. You get stuck in market preferences. you have product architecture that create deadlocks, and so forth. However, this is happening. When you make the jump, everybody will follow. So you better get ready for actually jumping from bowl to bowl to bowl. And that is exactly what an innovative culture is about. Maximize the first bowl and make ready to find the next one and make the jump. So basically, you have to extend the S-curve you have today, and you have to experiment with future X-curves. This is based on research we made in our database, where we can see that in the first horizon, you will be very good off using what we call market reader strategy, meaning that you do know how your market react and the dynamics on the market. Incremental technology will help you, what we call a spiral staircase leadership style. And all of this is actually based on research. You have all the sources at the bottom of the slide here. So Louis Williamson chapter, that is based on their research they made at Cambridge. So the spiral staircase means that you climb step by step toward a very well-defined goal. And capability, we find, is strongly correlated to that, is having a clear vision, coaching for goals, having core focus and market insights. Competence-wise, you have what you need and you can do a full-blown ROI. However, if you jump to Horizon 3, the unknown, then technology-driven radical strategy and need-seeking strategy is proven to be very efficient. And the leadership style that we call Explorer, actually it's based on Louis Williamson and Chapman, which means that you explore instead of pointing out the direction. Here, capabilities like knowledge sharing, co-creation, social science, that means like acting as an anthropologist, technology watch and open innovation is very useful, and it will help you. And the competence requirement is highly uncertain. Here you need to work with strategic scenarios because you can't do a full-blown ROI. Now the interesting thing is that this might sound altruistic, but no, this is about creating a big pie, like defining 5G. When you have defined 5G, okay, the game is on and you move into Horizon 2, where actually close yourself, start experimenting with the leadership style cauldron, basically an entrepreneurial style where you throw things into a cauldron and see what's happening. The fertile field, the gardener or Pac-Man, where you acquire companies, and you start to use technology in a partly radical way. You focus on need. The capabilities here is typically being able to work with platforms and components, prototyping, speed to market, product selection, and ideation. And by doing this kind of correlation table, we can actually understand how do you organize the leadership and the capabilities and the strategy to make sure that you stay on top in the first horizon, your blood circular, how you find insight in the third horizon, you bring that down in the second horizon to make actually useful experiments, learning, getting ready for implemented in the first horizon.
And I have a quick question, yes, Magnus, sorry to interrupt. So you define capabilities on that last slide as having a strong correlation to strategy and leadership. I just wanted to clarify, is that also how you were defining capabilities? Nope. With the incremental and radical assessment that you wanted us to write on a piece of paper earlier?
So capability is an ability on team level. A competence is ability on individual level. So capabilities are actually about behavior, what you're able to do. So what we did is we have 66 indicators for abilities, what we call them the capabilities, and we do correlation analysis between them and leadership styles and strategy. And that way we can actually define different kind of capability that is more important in each one of the horizons. And when it comes to the earlier the earlier statement, it is very clear that radical innovators operating in the second and third horizon, they are normally much stronger in decision making. And you can also see that one of the core capabilities is product selection in the second horizon, for instance. So they are very well structured in handling prototyping. They are speedy to market. They select the right things. They collect the right ideas. while the third horizon drives more towards understanding and insights, and they're very well structured for that. While in the first horizon, the one that really excel there, they have a clear vision, they're coaching for goals, their core focus and market insight. But the one that is only incremental, they are actually weak in all horizons. While the one that claim that they work with radical innovation statistically is strong in all horizons. So that's the whole point. Radical innovators statistically are incremental, but not vice versa. So this is one lens where we look at the horizons. But when we talk about the aspiration of being radical or incremental, we can see clearly that incremental innovators are ill-structured because they don't have to deal with it. They just make it happen and they hope for the best. And they are typically the spenders. While radical innovators, they need to be structured also in the first horizon, the incremental work, so to speak. Very good question. Thank you. So only 1 out of 10 have aligned the strategy with the capabilities, which we can see in our database, and that's quite interesting. So that leads us to that, well, maybe we need to assess the iceberg of innovation. What is that? That's the culture. So a few insights from our investigations. We learned top 5 lessons learned. Radical innovators are more structured. It takes 3 times to learn a process. You need to fail fast, but fail very cheap. And also diverse team are actually more efficient if they fight about the higher purpose. But if they do not have a higher purpose, they actually are worse off. So diverse team that fight for a higher purpose, they outperform conformity. And the 5th lessons learned is that focusing on the first horizon, which means cash, the second data, and the third insight, will help you to create a balanced portfolio over time. Then we also found what we call 5 top blockers for culture, innovation culture. The first one is silos. People work in silos, and that has to do with the specialization trend that's going on for the last 100 years in the Western world. So we work quite much in Asia, and in Asia and also in the Gulf states. We see that it's more of a tribe culture that creates silos, while in the Western world with Taylorism, it's more that you have been very specialized. And regardless the root cause, silos is effectively hindering innovation because you don't take use of what you have. Then lack of faith in objective is also a very common blocker. You simply don't believe in objectives that you have. And no higher purpose that lead to conflicts, fear of failure, or sometimes, as we see, maybe fear of not succeed. And then also trouble to deal with uncertainty. That's like 5 top blockers that we found. So, okay, how do you deal with this? So you need to organize for innovation by actually implementing an innovation management system with governance, process, roles, and tools. You need to have the capability, leadership, and culture in place, and an operational model. And you need to link that to strategic initiatives and portfolio management. When you do that, you actually grow faster and earn more money. So this is an example of an innovation management system, which is also compliant with upcoming ISO standard, where you have the governance model, and you have the innovation process, and you have also support with tools, methodology, capabilities, and cultures. And typically, innovation process is described with ideas and ideation. You do experiments, putting up hypotheses, clustering ideas, and this is a non-linear process, which makes it a little bit hard because we are trained and skilled in doing linear thinking, but actually the best ideations are done non-linear. And if you like to, please have a look at fixtheplanet.com, fix-the-planet.com. It's a big project we're running right now for where we find solutions to 4 of the UN sustainability goals. We work very closely with SAP NextGen here in New York, and also with UN. And it's a global ideation where we use non-linear thinking. So you can have a look at that actually if you want to see that live. And then you make a decision, you go into portfolio management, and now this is an actually very important part. When you start to run innovation projects, eventually you run into problems and you don't know what to do. And typically in most organizations, you put pressure on people. And that will not be especially effective because you don't know the solution. Instead, you should generate the spike and go back actually and do another ideation or look at old ideation and then move back again to the portfolio management. So you link the innovation management system to an operational model where you have management, allocation, competence, budgeting, technology transfer, and then you link that to strategic initiatives. That's how you create the innovation engine. And this is working very nicely as one innovation engine, and in many large corporations we work with, we have as much as 19 of these actually with interconnectivity between them. So that's happening in large corporations. In smaller corporations, you have one. In large, you have several, and you need to figure out how to allocate it. And this is also the foundation for creating an innovation strategy. So let's move into the assessment, and I will guide you through that one, and also use data from you guys to make it a little bit more interactive. So we assess, and actually you can do the assessment afterward. I will give you the link if you didn't do it before. We assess the aspiration, which is why what we innovate, and the abilities how we innovate it. So if we take the first question about the aspiration, is it incremental or radical? So have a look on your piece of paper and reflect on, did you write an I or an R, and why? So among you that answer the survey here, you score incremental. And that's not quite surprising because most do. What's interesting, however, is that if you have a look on your letter for the strategy, was it need, market, or technology, and reflect on that. So need seeking, they're looking for potential in the market by applying superior understanding of end users, while market research, they more understand the industry structure and the dynamics. And the technology drivers, they use actually technology to create breakthroughs. So if you read your own letter and reflect on that one, we can compare with the group. So in average, you say that you're technology driven and need seekers. That's quite interesting because in average, you score that you're incremental. So there's an untapped potential here actually, because if you're really serious about being technology driven, need seeking, if that really is the case, that you have that aspiration, that would go very nicely together with radical innovation. And this is actually how you score. So this is an interesting slide because it gives you some perspective. So the audience here, you guys that answered, I should stress, are in average the red bar. If we compare that to the upper quartile in the US in large corporations and upper quartile in China, I think there is reasons to be a little bit scared here. So we work with quite many Chinese companies. So of course I love my clients, but I'm also live here in the US, and I can, well, when you do comparisons like this, it's called for some reflections. Chinese companies, large one, they are much more lead oriented, much more technology driven than in the large one in US. And in the group here, you have a little bit ambitions of being technology driven and need seeking, very little on market. So you need to reflect on that. And of course, your profile looks different, but it's still called for reflection. And in your report, you can dig deeper into that. So when it comes to leadership, we have the cauldron that experiment, the spirit staircase that drives very systematically, step by step, the fertile field, which is the gardener, the Pac-Man doing the M&A, eating up others, the explorer, explore. And what's interesting here is that actually in the group here, you all score below 3, which means you're unmanaged in average, I should stress. This is very interesting because this is the lowest hanging fruit. If you want to apply an innovation strategy that is incremental and or radical, and you want to use technology need, well, You need to organize the leadership for that. And typically, with technology and need incremental, that would most likely be a good combination with speed staircase and eventually fertile field or cauldron, depending on a little bit. And if you add a component of radical, you will absolutely have more fertile field and cauldron and eventually also explorer. So if we jump to the one about the process, and you have a look on your letters you wrote down, is it strong, weak? This is also an interesting slide because in the group, but again, this is average. But if it were a company, I would say I would be worried because you don't have any way of making decisions in place. While large US corporation has, and China, they are amazing in that. Now we talk about large corporations, not small one. It's actually the other way around in China with small corporations, by the way. So this is very interesting because it's actually proved the case. So if there was a company, I would say, guys, you need to have more ideas because you don't have any. You need to be able to select and develop and commercialize. And if you know that, and you put in the context that you want to apply incremental innovation for need and for technology, well, it makes sense to work with a process. And the process is one lens of the capabilities. If we take another lens on the capabilities, the wheel of innovation, it's a patent wheel that we developed where you can map out your capability and you can see what is creating or impacting, I should say, not creating, impacting profit, market growth, internal transformation, and external transformation. You can have a look on these slides later on. So how does it look in the group? Yeah, you're a little bit strong in value capture. Otherwise, it's a little bit weak. If we compare the US with China, US is more open than China, better in building brand. Yeah, that makes sense. While China is super skilled in linkages and creating channels to the market. Yeah, makes sense. China is not that developed in supply. Well, that also makes sense, etc. And you can actually assess your capabilities and you can map it to profit, market, internal transformation, external transformation, or break it down even more to ecosystem innovation, organization innovation, sales innovation, or offer innovation. So what would happen if you actually did a 360? With that, I mean, if you ask employees and managers and externals in your organizations, how would they answer? Most likely they will not agree, and then you find things that are not aligned, and you will find strengths and weaknesses, strengths to build on, weaknesses to compensate for, alignments to be made between aspiration and ability, and then you can map that to the organization. And if you have a large organization, you can map it to many units, and you can have many ways of working with innovation. In mid-size, you can have one central function or one decentral function. Regardless of how you do the organizational design, by understanding the scene and the culture, you can make sure to align everybody and actually strengthen the capability needed for the conscious strategy, and you can also challenge the strategy, and you can compensate for what you need to compensate for. And secondly, you can create a baseline and start work from there, and actually in a scientific way have a metrics for the culture, and then you can start fostering it. And then you can actually create a baseline by adding, first of all, very good tangible recommendation. Secondly, a benchmark against who one you would like to beat. So that's the three things. By thinking in 360, assessing on all levels, internally, externally, create the baseline, iron out tangible recommendations, what to go for, dependent on who you want to be and why, and actually put up a benchmark. The game is on. And when you do that, we see that everything from mid-size scale-ups to very large corporation start to move. And to make this a little bit more simple, you can actually generate an innovation IQ between 1 and 100. The reason for that is to be able to compare and contrast. And innovation IQ is a way of identifying pockets of innovative culture in the organization and highlight them. It's also a way of actually putting up a strategic KPI on the dashboard used by the senior leadership. It's also something you can use to communicate to the market. And we have a good number of organizations around the world that is using this to communicate in annual reports. We have a good number of big corporations that use it internally for creating dashboards. We also have work with governments in Northern Ireland, for instance, where we use it to actually assess the innovation capability in a whole country and break it down and distribute on mid-sized companies, etc. So it's quite interesting how you can use this Innovation IQ score, and that is generated based on an assessment. When you have the assessment per unit, you can put up a plan and identify blockers to be removed, amplifiers that things you're already doing good, and use that to scale up. And then you can actually use that to remove blockers, activate amplifiers, reinforce and celebrate, and then you can handle change management. And this graph on the left-hand side is actually linked to, not be too technical, but it's linked actually to average score on capability and standard deviation. The standard deviation is on the y-axis. And we use that actually to, okay, what capabilities do I need to have to execute on my strategic win? That's number one. Two, how strong or weak am I? And then use that to iron out a very tangible, proven, evidence-based transformation plan, make it happen and coach for it, and then reassess. And if anyone would like to take the assessment afterwards, you actually get 40 pages AI generated analysis with tangible recommendation. It's based on your perception. It's not the full 360, but still it gives you a very nice kickstart in understanding more about fostering culture for innovation. Then you find it on innovation360.com/innovation assessment. It's open, you can go there and you can actually do it already today. And if you like to reach out afterwards, I'm more than happy to answer questions. We also have a few minutes actually on the call to take questions. So I saved a few minutes here at the end. So shoot and go ahead if anyone has any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Magnus. Before we dive into our questions, I just want to say thank you for such a thorough webinar. It was really interesting to hear you compare the US and China's innovation proficiency and capability. So thank you for sharing all of that.
You're welcome.
All right, so for our first question, they are referencing the slide you had on the top 5 lessons learned. So why are diverse teams more effective?
Oh, my favorite question. Thank you. So they have different perspectives and they come up with all kind of weird ideas. They start to debate. And if they focus on a higher cause, they will be able to fight about the cause. If they don't have a higher cause, they will start to debate and fight about personalities and everything crash. So the perfect way to get enemies, for life is to not have a higher cause and a diverse team. But the best way to really come up with new ideas is to have a diverse team and make sure that you're focusing all energy on something that you need to solve. And the reason is you have a different perspective. That's why. And it's not about gender. It's not about ethnicity. It's actually about personality, who you are, who you're reasoning, etc. That is the real diversity. So it's very little about geography or ethnicity or gender, much more about who am I as a person, and what is my personality, what is my thinking process, what's my experience and background.
Thank you so much for explaining that, Magnus. And yeah, we did get a question asking specifically what you meant about diverse, but you kind of touched on that and saying it's not about gender, it's more about personality. So that was a great response. And on to our next question. So this is also referencing the Innovation Horizons Codified slide. And so they're asking if you can elaborate a little bit more on Horizon 3 of the metrics column, which was the strategy option value based on scenarios.
Yeah, so basically, I can jump to that slide. Give me a second here. Give me a second, I will jump to it. So basically, Horizon 3 is the unknown, where you deal with things that haven't happened before, where you need to explore, test, and jointly agree. And you deal with uncertainty and you deal with infinity, because you have infinite possibility and total uncertainty. Therefore, you need to have a very open mind when you lead people. You should demand insights, but not data or cash. And to be able to explore when it's so many possibilities, you need to be share knowledge with others, including your competitors. You also need to create together with your competitors and customers and partners, and open up and maybe even share, and also use acting as an anthropologist to really figure out what people are doing, watching technology. So that might seem altruistic, but it's actually not. So 5G wouldn't happen if Nokia and Ericsson didn't collaborate, and then it would be meaningless. So the idea is to grow the pie, and then the game is on. So typically the capability is very much about creating insights, jointly sharing, sharpening the industry, and then you start from there. So that's very much about Horizon 3. And it could be quite hard to be there if you don't have certain size, because you can't really change the world yourself. So therefore you can, and I mean, internet is a blessing, because you can reach out to what many people and actually impact and create together. And then you create like a movement, and from there you bring it to the second horizon. That's actually where everything starts. And there's a good number of people that really failed here. Blu-ray is, I think, the most common example. They created a massive project to beat the CD and to beat DVDs, and they ended up with a fiasco. It was good, but no one used it because they were too close and didn't work with others. So the standard never took off, actually. So I think that's the best way to explain that.
Perfect. That really helped undress the horizons codified a little bit. I was trying to wrap my head around that a little bit too. So thank you for going into more detail on that.
Thank you.
All right, so our next question is, do you have any advice for US nonprofit organizations that are looking to innovate?
Yes. It's basically the same. So we have quite many NGOs and nonprofits. We will also work with governments. And I can share a story with you, and it's I'm allowed to do this because it's covered in Arabic media. So it's already, covered, so it's written about. I did a pretty good not a good, pretty big project in United Arab Emirates. And that is not the profit, that's like a governmental body. And they were called us in because they want to create the most sustainable city in the world, 2030, and that's Dubai. And they haven't been able to do that. So we jumped in and we did an assessment on how they operate. What we found was three things. Number one, they worked in silos, and that is in that case it has to do with tribe culture, and they brought it into the public sector. So they have to deal with that, and they agreed, yeah, that's a big problem. So, and number two, they didn't believe in goals at all. They just had like goals that was unbelievable hard to reach. So they need to break it down and make it more tangible. And number three, they couldn't really accept that they didn't know the answer. So when we had the presentation, I asked His Excellence, that was my counterpart, the Minister of Infrastructure and Development, that His Excellence, could you tell me what will be the next wind tunnel? That's the big holes in the buildings in Dubai. And he told me, no, of course not. No, His Excellence, I do understand that. And you will not even be able to tell what is the solution for Dubai. So that story is a very typical story. Just accept that you don't know the answer. make the goal tangible, and start collaborate. In that case, it was 3 very significant things that hindering them from executing on their plans. It was not money, not people, not competence, not skills. It was a total waste of energy because they didn't collaborate, they didn't believe in the goals, and they couldn't accept that they didn't know the answer. So that was a way of helping them, and they were very grateful for that, and it was covered in Arabic media, so I'm allowed to talk about it. So that's like a very typical advice for an NGO or non-profit or a governmental body. But of course, I mean, to really answer the question, I would need to do an assessment on you. But that's like a general answer that might give some help.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Yeah, I understand each company has its differences, and so it's hard to expertly talk on something when you don't know the full story. But I really appreciate you giving that general answer.
Great, thank you.
So one of our audience members pointed out that on your innovation blocker side, you didn't include, lukewarm buy-in from a CEO. So they're wondering, how important do you think is it to have C-suite buy-in for innovation success?
That is central. So if any client asks me if they can, get some help from us to get insights and iron out the transformation plan, or even coach them in transformation, my first step is to understand if they have a buy-in. Otherwise, we actually don't even take a meeting. So that's our take on it. It's change job, find another one. It's meaningless. You have to have a buy-in. That's for sure. That's absolutely necessary. However, in my general experience is actually, and this might be a little bit shocking, most C-suite do actually believe in innovation and have a buy-in. It is the middle management that does not believe in it. That's my general experience, and it's also not fully backed by data, but at least there are some indication in that direction, because they are actually quite worried what will happen when people start to put pressure. They should change, they should lead transformation. The only thing they want to do is to deliver on their goals and get their incentives, and everybody's happy. A little bit maybe to generalize, but I would say I'm more worried about middle management and top management. But if someone do not have a buy-in, we say no, and I think that you are working for them should say no too. So start with the top management. If you have buy-in, and I would say most of you have, that is a good start. But then you might have internal blockers that is rather middle management, which might be a little bit shocking, but that's our experience.
Yeah, that is actually very interesting to hear that middle management is the one that, may prevent innovation. But I guess, they are worried about their jobs and don't want to do anything too disruptive.
Yeah, or to create a lot of job for themselves. And then, of course, you could argue and say, ultimately, that is the CEO's problem. Yeah, it is. That's also why you need to enlighten them. That's also why we do the assessments, to bring this knowledge to in the light. And then they actually act. So when we run assessment, we normally do that on C level, or it could be if they have like teams or units that are a little bit autonomous. When you see the results, people start to act on it. And I haven't been to one CEO presentation where not the CEO say, we need to fix this. So I think that's the way around it, because middle managers, they do what they can, but they feel maybe trapped.
Well, that's really reassuring to hear that more times than not, the CEO will be the person that will want innovation. All right, so it looks like we have just a couple minutes here. I'm gonna give you one more question, Magnus, but if I didn't get to your question today, or if anyone has any more, I'll be sure to pass it on to him and make sure it gets answered. So for our final question, can you speak on how to create an innovation process that isn't too disruptive and meets your organizational innovation maturity?
Yeah, so a process in itself is not disruptive at all. A process is just like a bunch of words and put down on a piece of paper. It's how you apply it that is leading to if it's radical or not. everybody, regardless of your aspiration, need to have ideas. You need to be able to select them. You need to be able to develop them, and you need to be able to commercialize them. And commercialization in NGO or governments, it's about creating use. So it doesn't matter if you are a non-profit or not. Commercialization is to bring it out on the market, so to actually create value. So that 4 steps is always there: ideation, selection, development, commercialization. Then the question is how you implement it. And that has to do with your aspiration. That's also why we assess the aspiration. And if you like to be incremental, fine. But here's the thing. Most of our assessment we done and most of the data we have strongly indicate that incremental innovators are actually ill-structured. And that is a key lesson I would like to really send with you guys, that an innovation process doesn't have to do with incremental or radical. It's a way of working. What is the case is that you need to be structured whether you want to be radical or not. Then you will stay around longer. And the whole point is to actually use a structured approach to be able to create some time to figure out the future. Think about the message to grow the pie. If you shrink the pie and kill your customers, well, I don't think that you will be happy. So being not focused or only incremental might eventually lead you to that. So my really advice, think about today's business, be efficient, use an innovation process for that, and create room for experiment and learn for the future, because then you will stick around much longer and you will grow the pie and everybody's happy. And the opposite is not where you want to be.
All right, well, I think that's a great way to end this webinar, and we're definitely going to take that away to use a structured approach when starting an innovation process. But unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. So thank you so much to our sponsor, Innovation 360, and to you, Magnus, and to everyone for attending. I'm Naba, and you can find Business Innovation Brief on Twitter at Innovation Brief. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.